Marcus Blake was the kind of man who viewed a sunrise not as a poetic event, but as a biological green light for productivity, a man who at 52 had built a kingdom out of glass, steel, and recycled water while the rest of the world was busy arguing about the price of gas. You see, when you've spent 30 years turning dust into a high-tech oasis like eco-harvest technologies, you develop a certain internal rhythm, a quiet, humming discipline that doesn't need applause or a stage to keep going. And for Marcus, his headquarters was more than just a business. It was a physical manifestation of his soul, a place where vertical hydroponic systems glowed under LED lights like a neon forest, and every drop of water was treated with the reverence of liquid gold. It was a sanctuary, a secluded estate just past the city lines where the chaotic noise of bureaucracy was supposed to fade into the background. Or at least that was the lie Marcus told himself until that Monday morning when the shadows on his driveway looked a little too long and a lot too white. He pulled up in his dark green pickup, a reusable mug of coffee still steaming in the cup holder, but the familiar hum of the morning was replaced by the sight of 3 massive white trucks parked exactly where they didn't belong, inside his property line. There were orange barricades, the kind that scream official business with a loud, obnoxious plastic voice, and a cluster of people in uniforms pacing around with clipboards like they were measuring the air for treason. Marcus felt that first cold drop of unease slide down his spine, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with the caffeine and everything to do with the military-style haircut on the man currently gesturing for him to stop. This wasn't an inspection, it was a siege in broad daylight, and as Marcus rolled down his window, the air that rushed and smelled like cheap cologne and bad news. The man didn't introduce himself, didn't offer a polite good morning that actually meant anything. He just barked about environmental compliance and restricted zones as if Marcus were a trespasser on his own land. Marcus, being the kind of man who doesn't take kindly to being told where to park on soil he paid for in blood and sweat, exited the truck with a thud that echoed against the silence of the facility. He stood his ground, crossing his arms, his imposing frame casting a long, dark shadow over the inspector's clipboard, demanding to see the paperwork because in Marcus's world, a man's word is only as good as the ink that backs it up. But what he saw on that clipboard wasn't a warrant, it wasn't a court order, it was a mess of jargon-heavy nonsense. Newly amended regulations, vague environmental safety protocols, and a whole lot of administrative right-of-way that sounded like it had been cooked up in a basement by someone who hated farmers. "You're overstepping," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble that usually made people rethink their life choices. But the inspector just gave him a thin, joyless smile, the kind of smile that says, "I have a badge and you have a headache." The audacity was staggering. These people were already unloading equipment, setting up sensors near his water tanks, and walking through his greenhouses with the casual arrogance of kings. Marcus watched them, his mind racing like a turbine, calling his operations manager Emily only to find out they'd been there an hour, claiming noncompliance, and refusing to provide a single straight answer. This wasn't a routine check, it was an ambush, and as Marcus watched a tall woman named Olivia Bennett approach him with a smile that was sharper than a surgical blade, he realized that the legal jargon was just a smoke screen for something much more predatory. Olivia had that corporate supervisor energy, the kind of person who could fire you and make it sound like she was doing you a favor, telling Marcus everything was in accordance with the law, while her team began to dismantle his life's work piece by piece. She told him he was welcome to consult legal counsel, a dismissive wave of the hand that meant we've already won and you're just a footnote. And as Marcus watched his employees huddled in confused groups, the weight of the situation started to press down on him. He retreated to his office, his boots crunching on the gravel like he was treading on broken glass. And he dialed David Sullivan, his attorney and a man who knew how to untangle the stickiest webs the city could weave. David's voice was sharp, a pragmatic anchor in the storm, telling Marcus to document everything, sign nothing, and for the love of God, don't let them take a single piece of hardware off the property. But then, the hammer dropped. Emily burst in with a tablet showing the live feed from the security cameras, and Marcus's stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. Two inspectors were actually dismantling a section of the irrigation system, unscrewing parts of his intellectual property, and tossing them into labeled containers like they were evidence in a murder trial. Marcus didn't walk to the greenhouse. He marched, a force of nature in denim and leather, finding a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke to him like he was a stubborn child who didn't understand why he couldn't play with his toys. "This equipment needs to be tested in a controlled environment," the man said, as if he weren't currently committing a $1,600 an hour theft of proprietary technology. The confrontation was electric, a standoff under the humming LED lights where Marcus threatened to personally escort them to the gate, only for Olivia to reappear with that same infuriatingly calm demeanor. She warned him that resistance rarely pays off, a phrase that sounded like a line from a bad dystopian movie, and Marcus realized she was trying to bait him into a mistake, trying to get him to swing a fist or scream a threat so she could have him hauled off in zip ties. He clenched his fists, forcing the air out of his lungs in a slow, controlled hiss, and signaled Emily to follow him back to the office, because if they wanted to play the long game of bureaucratic harassment, Marcus was going to learn the rules and then break them over his knee. An email from David confirmed the worst. The ordinances they were citing hadn't just appeared out of thin air. They were pushed through a month ago by a coalition of local officials and a front company called TerraPlan Consultants. David's voice on the follow-up call was grim, explaining that TerraPlan was just a shell for Stonegate Ventures, a massive investment firm that had been aggressively harvesting agricultural land by making the operations untenable with red tape and fines until the owners had no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar. This wasn't about the environment. It wasn't about water conservation. It was about a group of predators in suits who saw Marcus's independent, self-sufficient paradise as a line item they wanted to acquire. "They're using the law as a garrote," Marcus muttered, looking out his window as the sun hit the glass of his greenhouses, realizing that every photo they took and every sample they collected was just data for his own funeral. He told Emily to back up every bit of software to an off-site server, to lock down the control room, and to brief the staff that nobody, absolutely nobody, speaks to these officials without his say-so. The atmosphere at Eco Harvest had shifted from a hub of innovation to a besieged fortress, the usual hum of productivity replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence that felt like the air before a tornado. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across his property, Marcus Blake sat at his desk, staring at the white trucks still parked on his land, knowing that he was running out of time and that the men in suits were just getting started. The tension didn't just linger that night, it grew teeth. By Tuesday morning, the orange plastic barricades had been replaced by heavy-duty chain-link fencing, and the inspectors had multiplied like a virus. Marcus arrived to find a man in a crisp navy windbreaker, handing him a cease and desist order with a red wax seal that looked more like a theatrical prop than a legal document. It claimed imminent environmental hazard, a vague, terrifying phrase that effectively froze his life's work in place. Every pump, every LED, every recycling turbine halted. Marcus crumpled the paper in his fist, the sound like a bone snapping in the quiet morning air, and he looked at the man and said, "You think a piece of paper can stop the sun from rising on this farm? Get off my driveway." But they didn't. They moved with a clinical, detached precision that was more frightening than outright aggression. Marcus paced his office, watching the live feeds as Olivia Bennett's team began drilling, actually drilling, into his filtration tanks. These weren't just water containers. They were custom-engineered systems designed to filter microscopic particulates without chemicals, a secret recipe of physics and biology that Stonegate Ventures clearly wanted to reverse engineer. He stormed out there, Emily at his heels, and found Olivia standing by the tanks, her sharp suit looking like a suit of armor against the industrial backdrop. "If you damage that system," Marcus told her, his voice a low, vibrating growl, "I will spend every dime I have making sure you're personally liable for the ruin of this company." Olivia just adjusted her sunglasses, the reflection hiding her eyes, and told him she was within her rights to collect direct samples. It was a game of chicken played with $1,600 an hour stakes. Marcus ordered his security team to lock down the area, creating a human perimeter around his hardware. And for a few hours, it was a stalemate, suits versus work boots under the unforgiving Ohio sun. But the psychological warfare was just beginning. By late afternoon, Emily reported that the staff were receiving anonymous calls, offers for better opportunities at unnamed firms, relocation packages, signing bonuses, all the classic tactics of a corporate raider trying to hollow out a company from the inside. Then Noah Parker, one of Marcus's lead engineers, found the bugs. Not the kind you spray for, but high-frequency transmitters hidden beneath the panels of the western greenhouse and tracking devices embedded in the soil sensors. They weren't just inspecting. They were mapping his entire infrastructure, probably feeding data to a Stonegate server in real time so they could plan the residential luxury community David had warned him about. Marcus sat in the dark control room that night, the blue light of the monitors making his face look like a ghost's, and he felt a cold, hard clarity settle over him. They think they're the only ones who can use technology to win a fight, he whispered to Emily. But they're playing in my backyard now. He spent the next 48 hours in a blur of tactical planning. David had filed for an emergency injunction, but the courts were slow, and Stonegate was fast. Marcus knew he couldn't just sit and wait for a judge to realize he was being robbed. He needed a counterstrike. He retrieved a portable signal jammer from storage, a piece of kit he'd bought years ago when he was paranoid about industrial espionage, and he took it to the roof. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the faint, mosquito-like hum of drones filled the air. They were conducting aerial surveys, mapping every inch of the land for their future luxury enclave. Marcus clicked the jammer on, and he watched with a grim, silent satisfaction as one of the drones abruptly veered left, tumbled out of the sky, and crunched into the woods. One down. But the real discovery came on Friday morning. Noah found an unmarked container buried near the foundation of the western greenhouse. Inside wasn't a sensor or a wire, but a thick folder of documents. Blueprints, maps, a glossy development proposal titled The Stonegate Reservoirs, Luxury Living. It showed Marcus's greenhouses replaced by artificial lakes and his water recycling plant turned into a community clubhouse. It was a map of his own erasure. The sheer arrogance of it, to bring the plans for his destruction onto his own land before they even owned it, ignited a fire in Marcus that burned away the last of his hesitation. They're counting on us to follow the rules while they break them, Marcus told his team in the conference room, the folders spread out like a battle map. They want a compliance disaster? Fine, let's give them one. He and his IT team spent the night crafting a Trojan horse of data. They used the very transmitters Stonegate had planted to feed them a simulated breach, a catastrophic failure in the containment system that looked like a massive chemical leak was about to hit the local water table. It was a digital flare, a trap designed to draw the predators out of the tall grass. At 2 a.m. on Saturday, the trap snapped shut. Marcus and Emily watched the thermal feeds as three figures in dark tactical gear emerged from a sedan parked on the perimeter. They didn't have clipboards this time. They had bolt cutters and canisters of what looked like industrial dye. They were going to simulate a leak to justify a permanent seizure of the property. Marcus waited until they were deep inside the east greenhouse, kneeling over the pipes before he gave James, his head of security, the signal. Flashlights cut through the dark like sabers, and the intruders froze, caught in the act of sabotaging a multi-million-dollar facility. When the police arrived, they didn't find non-compliant farmers. They found corporate saboteurs with bags full of fake evidence. But Marcus knew that wouldn't be enough to take down Stonegate. He needed the court of public opinion, and he needed it now. As the sun rose on the most stressful week of his life, Marcus Blake didn't go to sleep. He called David. He gathered every photo of the tracking devices, every drone flight path, and the glossy development plans they'd found, and he prepared to walk into that courthouse not as a defendant, but as an executioner. The courthouse was a temple of marble and hushed whispers, the kind of place where men in three-piece suits usually trade your life for a line item on a ledger. But that morning, the air felt different, charged with the static of a storm about to break. Marcus stood in the hallway, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in 5 years, feeling the weight of the flash drive in his pocket like a loaded weapon. Stonegate's legal team was already there, a row of identical haircuts and expensive briefcases, looking at Marcus with a mixture of pity and boredom. The look a vulture gives a carcass it hasn't quite finished picking. Olivia Bennett sat in the front row, her face a mask of corporate stoicism, but when Marcus caught her eye, he didn't look away, he didn't blink, he just gave her a slow, deliberate nod, the kind you give an opponent before the final round. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a woman who looked like she'd heard every line in the book and was currently reading the sequel, listened to Stonegate's attorney spin a tale of environmental catastrophe. He spoke about mercury spikes and unstable filtration, using the very data Marcus had fed through the fake transmitters to justify a permanent seizure of the land. It was a masterpiece of fabrication, a performance of high-stakes theater, and for a moment, the room was silent as the judge reviewed their evidence. Then, David Sullivan stood up. He didn't lead with a legal argument. He led with a projector screen. "Your Honor," David said, his voice a calm, sharp contrast to the previous theatrics, "I'd like to show you what a standard inspection looks like at Eco Harvest." He clicked a button, and the screen exploded with 4K footage from Marcus's hidden cameras, the ones the inspectors didn't know about. The room watched in stunned silence as Olivia's team was caught planting tracking devices, dismantling proprietary hardware without a warrant, and finally, the midnight footage of the 3 saboteurs trying to inject industrial dye into the water system. But the killing blow was the development proposal. When the luxury enclave blueprints appeared on the screen, showing the community center sitting exactly where the courtroom currently sat, the Stonegate attorney's face turned shade of gray that matched his suit. They didn't come to inspect. Marcus's voice rang out, breaking protocol but commanding the room. They came to erase. They used the law as a mask for a mugging, and they did it because they thought I was too small to fight back. The judge didn't even wait for the rebuttal. She issued an immediate injunction against Stonegate, freezing their assets related to the project and ordering a federal investigation into TerraPlan Consultants. As the gavel hit the wood, the sound felt like a bell of liberation, a physical release of the pressure that had been crushing Marcus's chest for weeks. The aftermath was a landslide. The federal raid on TerraPlan's offices uncovered a treasure trove of corruption. Emails, bank transfers, and a list of a dozen other independent farms they had successfully dismantled using the same compliance playbook. Stonegate's reputation didn't just tarnish, it vaporized. Lawsuits from affected owners poured in. And for the first time in his life, Marcus found himself at the center of a movement. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a symbol of resistance in a world that tries to automate the soul out of everything. 2 weeks later, the white trucks were gone, the chain-link fences were down, and the hum of the LED forest was back to its steady, rhythmic pulse. Marcus walked the perimeter of his estate, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the glass structures that had survived the siege. He stood by the main greenhouse and mounted a small copper plaque Emily had commissioned. It read, "Here stands a company that refused to yield." It was a quiet moment, a moment of deep, vibrating peace, the kind you only earn after you've stared down a giant and refused to blink. But as I sit here looking at the ruins of Stonegate's plan, I have to ask you, Marcus won this round, but how many others didn't? How many independent businesses are being hollowed out by corporate predators hiding behind compliance and regulations, while the rest of us look the other way? Was Marcus a hero for using illegal jammers and false data to trap them? Or is the system so broken that we have to become outlaws just to keep what we own? I want to hear your HOA and corporate nightmare stories in the comments. Did you fight back, or did they win? Let's talk about where the line is between the law and the hustle. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next fight is always just around the corner.